Dear listener, welcome into Other People's Shoes, Season 17, entitled Dear. This season, we venture into emotional territories as we explore words left unsent through this intimate process of writing a letter that was never meant to reach its recipient. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that speaks volumes in these letters. These unrevealed stories, confessions, and reflections held within these letters until now are powerful. Welcome to Dear. Sincerely, Other People's Shoes.
That is right, one and all. We are back at the typewriter. We're back hitting Control S. We're saving this, or if you're a Mac user, it's Command S. Just want to make sure we get everyone involved in this. This is one episode. This is one letter you're going to want to open. Again, I have to invoke the memory of Blue's Clues. Guess who got a letter? Guess who got a letter? Guess who got a letter? I wonder who it's from. Okay, we're not that elementary here. Maybe so. It's fun to think back to our imagination. Ask yourself this question as we jump into today's episode. When's the last time you got a handwritten letter from somebody? That's the question you really want to ask yourself. Help me welcome in my friend from the great Wildcat, maybe even Sun Devil State. We don't know. Maybe even the Lumberjacks of Northern Arizona. Help me welcome in my new friend, Matthew. Matthew, how are you today?
I am doing well, man. Good to see you. Good to be here.
See, Matthew seems too formal. I know you said you kind of go back and forth, the professional sense, like it's Matthew.
Yeah, Matt's cool, man.
But if we're at a coffee shop, do you even drink coffee? That's probably a requirement. In your role.
Dude, we got to stay way caffeinated.
Okay, all right. And we'll get to your role momentarily. So I would think if we're at a coffee shop, it's going to be Matt. Like if they're calling out Officer Matt.
Matt. There's other choice word these days that they use other than our name.
Matt's an easy one. I don't feel like the barista messes up on Matt.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's pretty simple. I think the only problem they have with Matt is 1 T or 2.
All right. Now, so here's full disclosure. Neil, pretty easy to remember. I often say Neil, like Neil Diamond, the singer, and people are like, oh, I love Neil Diamond. That's generally the response. Or Neil Diamond, I hate Neil Diamond. It's one of the two. Most often, though, most people are like, oh, I love Neil Diamond. But here's the thing. People have called back and said, hey, I'm trying to reach Dion. Like, how do you get Neil from Dion? I'm like, all right, it gets better. I've gotten Dean, okay?
All right.
Not sure again how you get from Neil to Dean.
Right.
My favorite and the classic always seems to happen also is Nick. Hey, I'm trying to reach Nick. Like that's close. Neil, Nick. Oh, nope. I don't see that either. I don't hear that either. And then of course the all-time favorite is Neo from The Matrix. So there we are.
I
don't know how you get all those mixed up. That's happened more times than I'd like to admit. So anyway, it's good to say, Matt.
I'd go with Neo.
Right. That's fun. Yeah. Dion, I do like Deion Sanders, but I'm just saying, like, how do you get Dion from Neil?
Neil. Yeah, I don't know.
Wondering minds want to know. All right, Matt. So on to you. We love to lead off every show with this question, and that's this. What size shoes do you wear?
I am 10 and a half.
Okay. Easy to get into. I can get into a 10 and a half. I can almost get into an 11.
Right. I'm the same. I'm kind of in between. So I could do 11 in some and 10 and a half in others. Yep.
Wow, samesies. Now, here's the favorite question. No pressure, no judgment. Is there a style or brand that loves to be on your feet maybe more than another?
Chuck Taylors all day long.
Wow. Not even a blink, not even a hesitation. Now, are they the all-star Chuck Taylors, right? The old school?
Yep, the old school all-star canvas Chuck Taylors. That is my jam.
Okay. Now, is there a favorite color? There's a lot of color waves in that. Maybe pin you down to a color.
I am actually a pretty traditional guy, so I like the vintage. It's kind of a off-white color with the white bottom portion there and the red and blue stripe going around it.
Okay. Now, obviously, you've never suffered from plantar fasciitis because you can't wear those. Oh, you do, and you still wear them?
I currently have plantar fasciitis in my left foot. Style is important, bro.
Those suck for your feet, though. Okay, so you can't see them because they're very far in the back there. But on that wall there's actually a pair of Vans.
Nice.
And they're the old school skate Vans. I used to wear them every Wednesday when the show came out. And one Wednesday I was wearing them around the office. And I'm like, I get back to my desk and I sit down. Man, my feet hurt. Why do my feet hurt today? And then I look down and I'm like, oh, it's the Vans. There's no arch in them, much like your beloved Chuck Taylors.
Yep, and Vans is my second choice. I have a couple pair of Defcons that I love.
Man, all right. I feel bad for your feet. They're very flat. Well, getting into you and getting into your story, this whole letter writing thing, let me tell you, some people have gravitated to, others have politely said, Neil, I would love to come on. That seems like a daunting task to sit down and write a letter. I'm like, okay, so virtually in your mind, maybe write the letter. You don't have to physically It's metaphorically speaking. For you, I felt like, and maybe this is me misreading the room, so I'm going to put my hands up to that. This was a challenge for you, right or wrong on that?
Yeah, no, it was a challenge, and a challenge because we discussed throughout my life and my career, I've had a lot of loss, a lot of pain, a lot of loss. You said, do this. I was like, ooh, guys, we put stuff back in a compartment and we shut the door and we leave it in there. These kind of letters open that door.
So let's help with that. Your career, you've spent the last how many years in law enforcement?
It'll be 31 years.
Wow. And what on earth leads young Matthew into law enforcement?
In the subject matter of my letter here, I had a grandpa who was in World War II. He was essentially my father figure. And so I think I gained a sense of service from him, watching him and his buddies. So I knew I wanted to serve. And then what catapulted me forward rather quickly was my now wife of coming up on 31 years, my then girlfriend. We were pregnant and we were young, 19 years old, pregnant, had to figure it out. I knew I wanted to do something military or I wanted to do this. This is the path I chose. Been doing it ever since.
That's interesting. The path you chose. Some would say the path chose them. You're saying, no, that's a path I made sure I went down.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We're predestined to do certain things. Doors get opened or paths get shown to us and we pick the way we're going to go. In my mind, I had two clear paths. It was military or this. This became it. Yeah, that was it. I do feel like I chose to go this direction.
So let's get into your letter.
My letter is essentially to my grandpa. So growing up, grew up with a single mom. My dad left, I think must have been about 4 years old from what I can remember. So about 4 years old, dad bounces, and I really don't see him maybe 5 times throughout my life. So really was not involved in my life, male figure, father figure, any of that stuff. My grandparents on my mom's side lived really close to us. They were just probably a mile away, maybe a mile and a half. Mom being a single mom, grew up in Section 8 housing, government subsidized housing. My mom wanted to make it on her own, not rely on other people. We were in government subsidized housing in kind of a ghetto neighborhood. I would break away from that. She would take me to my grandparents quite often because a lot of times she was working night, working extra hours. Spent a lot of time with my grandma and grandpa. So my grandpa essentially became my father figure. Was a very strong male role model. He was a Texan. He was actually born in California, but raised in Texas. His family was from Texas. He was born while on a trip to California, which always made him mad because he was a Texan. And the fact that he was born in California, he didn't like. He was a Texan at heart, World War II vet, Texan. So you can see where this is going as to the kind of guy that I grew up with as a father figure. I was a sophomore in high school. He passed away suddenly, had a heart attack unexpectedly. That was a pretty devastating blow to me at that time, essentially losing my dad at the age of 15, about to be 16, a dad that was very involved in my life. We did a lot of hunting and fishing together. We had a lot of trips together. I hung out with him quite a bit. I was like his little dude, would always hang around, and when him and his friends would get together. As I went through my letter, and I actually did put pen to paper. I won't read it. I'll give you a summary. Essentially, I just letting him know, I don't think he understood what he meant to me and that he was my father figure and that I looked up to him and I viewed him as my hero. I also don't think he understood how much I paid attention to him and his interactions with his buddies, returned home with from war, his business partners. He was a small business owner. And so I watched him interact with all of these people. I watched handshake deals that actually meant something. And so I watched this interaction amongst men from our greatest generation. Again, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up with a father figure that was from the greatest generation, have boomer tendencies. Because of that, kind of go into what he meant to me, how much our time together meant to me, the impact that the hunting and fishing had on me. There was a goose hunt that we went on in the middle of winter, and he winged a goose, and we had a little 14-foot aluminum boat, and he says, well, we got to go get it. It was out on the lake, and the lake was freezing cold. The goose, being just winged, did not want to be caught. My job at the front of the boat was to catch the goose, no matter what it did. It took me a few tries, ended up with me almost in the lake. I finally got my hands on the goose and captured it, and all I remember about that is how cold, I don't think my hands have ever been that cold ever again in my life because the water was freezing. Every time I would miss the goose, one time I had it and it pecked me, so I let it go. And he's like, hang on to it. And I said, well, it's trying to attack me. And he's like, you're bigger than the goose. You got this. And so he's just like rooting me on to get this goose. So I remember that very distinctly. One of our fishing trips that I talk about to him was a fishing trip in which I got stung by a scorpion because here in Arizona, we have a lot of those. So I went and I told him because I was fishing off the the bank and it was nighttime and we had a campfire and stuff. And I went, I told him, Grandpa, I just got stung by a scorpion. And he handed me some whiskey and he said, here, take a sip of that. Like 13 years old, took a sip of whiskey. And he said, okay, go to bed. You'll be fine. And that was his solution for the scorpion bite. He kind of molded me into understanding that there's going to be tough stuff throughout your life and you just got to deal with it and push through because ain't nobody coming to save you. It's all about you. And then I learned a lot from him watching those business deals that I talked about where he made handshake deals for big deals that were going on with businessmen, made on a handshake and people held their word. The business deals would go through, no contracts, no anything like that. And I would watch that happen too. And I think it just instilled a certain honor code in me that when you deal with people, you do what you say you're going to do, that you treat people with respect. Went into all of that. And I end the letter letting him know that I wish that he could have been here to see his great-grandchildren. And I knew this was going to get me. It's his lineage, essentially. I wanted him to see, the impact he had on me, who I had become, how that carried forward.
It does make sense.
Finished with just letting him know that I can't wait to see him and Grandma again, and we get to fish and hunt all the time. That was kind of it, man.
Well, first off, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. I appreciate you working through it. I know it was going to be a challenge. I think we both kind of knew that. But
Yep.
Again, I appreciate you willing to share that.
Okay.
Was this your mother's father?
Yes, mother's father.
No idea where dad's father is. No grandfather there to speak
No,
of.
the funny thing is that I actually did interact with my grandparents on my father's side. My father was kind of a rolling stone. He did his own thing. My grandparents, I interacted with them as well. And my grandpa on my dad's side, I have distinct memories of him. Actually, he was my umpire in Little League. So I played Little League baseball and he was my umpire several times. He would take me golfing with him. I didn't necessarily golf, but I'd go golfing with him. He took me to ASU, go Devils, to some of their baseball games. We would watch the baseball games together because he loved baseball. That was his sport. And so I did spend some time with them.
Obviously, one has a greater chapter, we'll say, in your life than the other one.
Right.
Sounds like, again, according to your description. It's amazing that dad never re-enters the picture.
As you go through life, you always kind of wonder why. Like I said, I saw my dad on several occasions. And as an adult, I had the opportunity to talk to him. I kind of asked him that. Why did you never come around? At one point, he lived 2 blocks from us. Never see him. He said, look, basically, my life was a mess and I didn't want to mess yours up with it. Your mom and I agreed that the best thing for all of us is for me to stay out of the way and let her raise you right, me not interfere with that. And he told me that there was plenty of times where I wanted to come around. I had that agreement in place.
Wow. I mean, that's somewhat noble.
I don't have any disdain towards my dad. I kind of feel the same way. Okay, you understood who you were and how you were. You didn't have time for me or anything. There was a plan in place. I think it made it a little bit easier in my mind to accept that. Plus the fact that, like I said, I had what I considered my dad was my grandpa, and he fully filled that role. There was never a time where I was just, and I had uncles that filled that role as well. I never had a longing for a male role figure because they were all around us.
What do you miss most about your grandfather?
Oh man, like our trips together, because he was crazy, man. And we would always end up on some adventure. We were on a fishing trip and we were getting to the lake at night and he stopped, pulled over to pee before we got to the lake. And when he stepped out, he stepped on a rattlesnake and I watched him proceed to stomp a rattlesnake to death before it bit him. There was another time where I didn't know this at the time. He had shot an animal and it was out of season. So he wasn't supposed to shoot the animal. He was like, just hang out here and let me know if any cars are coming while I get this thing out. And I was like, okay, like Grandpa knows what he's doing. We get back and he's like, any cars? I'm like, no, we're good. And he's like, all right, cool. We got to get this back. We got to get it to the freezer. And later on, find out, going back to that story with him, is like, yeah, we weren't supposed to do that. It's like, holy smoke. Grandpa was crazy, man.
The hard part, I think, for some, especially in this series, is the idea that people suffer from a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
The idea of somebody hearing you describe this grandfather figure and they're like, why couldn't I have had that? Why
Right.
didn't I have that? And you mentioned the legacy, and the hardest part of your letter was him not seeing this next generation that you've now been a part of, you and your wife have been a part of. What do you think he would make of your life right now? Maybe you get that weekend out at a lake, you get a weekend with him. What do you do with that weekend?
Oh, man. Well, being a guy of faith, I would have questions about what happened after death. That's a whole different.
That's a fair question. Sure.
Right.
I mean, there's a few of people I would like to be like, what is it like really?
Yeah, exactly.
What am I working so hard for? I
I
hear
had an
that.
opportunity to talk to him about all the stuff that's went on. I think the discussion would mainly be about this type of stuff. Man, I really hate that you left so early, because I would have liked for you to have been there for all of these things to happen, or you to see them in person happen, to see and hold your grandkids and, be able to kind of tell them some of the stories from the good old days and reaffirm some of Dad's stories about the crazy times that we had. Yeah, I don't know, man. And I feel like there'd be a lot of catching up. Hey, so what's this person doing now? So I feel like it'd be a lot of him trying to catch up on where's everybody else at, or after we get done talking about our family and where we're all at.
It's hard in those moments too, because I know I want my imagination to really run amok and really allow me to have that moment, allow me that time to say, what would that really be like? One of my favorite books of all time really is The Shack.
Oh, dude.
And I love that story for so many reasons. I mean, there's just a plethora. I mean, there's just not enough time to go into every little nuance that I love about it. He does get a reconciliation. I'm wrecking the book for those that haven't read it. I don't know why you haven't, but you should go read it. I'm wrecking it. He does have a reconciliation with his dad. Him and his dad were very much estranged. It's in those moments that I hold on to, that I think, okay, if there's somebody in my life that I've been estranged with, can I really go in that moment, that weekend, that amazing weekend that I'm having, and maybe it's that person that I spend the weekend with, and get right with them? Again, you talk about this legacy that he left you. How did that legacy, that building into you, that pouring into you, that foundational stuff that you talk about, did that have any effect on you as far as your work in law enforcement? And if so, speak to that.
Yes. And I would say probably some of the biggest effects is me watching him, again, interact with people, whether it be business or friends, how he treated everyone the same. It didn't matter if it was the janitor or the CEO, how well he treated people. So he instilled that in me for sure. I have a true sense of humility in the person that I am. Like I always feel like we're all equal human beings. There's no better than anybody else. Any of that definitely came from him, and that helps in this job immensely. Allows you to be empathetic. Anybody that you come across in any situation, because we see some of the worst of our society and of our world, and you have an understanding. Everybody just has their life that they're living, and some people have been dealt just crappy hands. You see that, and you have to have empathy for that. Definitely one of the things he instilled in me. And then, like I said, a code of honor. I feel like, especially in today's world, people have lost their sense of right and wrong. That the lines are so blurred with that. And I think instilling in me a sense of right and wrong, and then being willing to stand up for what's right, no matter the consequences. And like in my case, I could walk out the door tomorrow and have to die to save somebody else. And that's cool, man. That's part of the job. I think he definitely instilled some of those values in me. And as I talked about his craziness, my mom would probably definitely agree with the fact that I've done some crazy shit in my life, done some crazy stuff in this work. And not that I'm fearless. I think, again, Grandpa instilled in me is just get after it and do what you have to do. Don't really worry about the consequences. It'll all work itself out.
Not to throw rocks too much. You talk about, again, this amazing man, this legacy leaving impact, massive impact man. And then you talk about your mom and how she kind of had a rough go of it. Between your dad and then the subsidized housing and growing up very tough. Sounds like, and you were in some really impoverished moments in life. I would imagine, again, kids are mean. Kids are awful. Right. I would imagine there was maybe some bullying. Again, back in those days, we probably didn't call it that. We probably just called it making fun of somebody. Nowadays, it's probably bullying. In all of those things, what do you think, and I know you can't really maybe necessarily speak for her, but what do you think your mom saw in her father that then maybe even transferred onto you?
Oh, man. That's tough. I think my mom made sure that I spent time with my grandparents, both of them, right? Grandma and grandpa. I think she saw a different grandpa than she did dad. I know, because we've had these discussions, my mom and I have. And my grandpa was a very hard father on his children. You can imagine, after describing him being his son or his daughter, that was a rough upbringing. He had been through World War II. Him and my grandma both had been through World War II, both served. They both got out. They went through the Depression. His family was very poor. They were migrant farmers. Very tough dude. She experienced a different man than I experienced. I think my mom saw that when she saw my grandpa and I interacting, and the way he treasured me, according to her, and the way he treated me was totally different than the way he had treated his kids growing up. He was much harder on them. She knew that I needed a father figure because she understood where we grew up. I grew up in a gang-infested area. There's a lot of fatherless males that end up in prison of that lack of a good, strong male role model. And it's tough for a woman to raise a man in this world. It just is. Just like it's tough for me to raise a daughter, the lack of understanding, being a male compared to a female. I think my mom recognized the void. She recognized how my grandpa interacted with me and how it was different than what she had seen. She encouraged it. I got to spend as much time as I wanted to with my grandpa. If he said, hey, we're going to go on a fishing trip and he's going to miss some school, that was okay. I would get my work that I needed to get done ahead of time or take work with me. And she would allow me to skip a day of school and go fishing or hunting with grandpa. And so she encouraged that interaction quite a bit. I think she recognized what was happening.
Isn't it interesting though? My dad, we'll put myself on the table here. My dad spent 24 some odd years in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
And he was tough. When he was home, man, he was tough. He was very strict. He was very, this is the way we do things. This is the way it is. Just really strict. A now 16-year-old daughter who has spent some time with my dad. And she'll come home and she calls him Grandpa Duck. That's what my dad wanted to be called. She'll come home when she was hanging out with him quite a bit. And she'd say, you know, Grandpa Duck did this with us, or Grandpa Duck played video games with us, or we did this, or we did that, or he took us here, or we did this. And I'm like,
is that
who
the
is
same
this guy?
dude?
Who is this guy you're describing? Because this is not the guy I grew up around. I finally got some cojones and some courage. I bought it on eBay. It was amazing. A great deal. It was a buy it now thing. Got some courage. And I went to him and I said, what is the deal? And he said, well, they're not my kids. I can just play with them and send them home. I was like, hold on a second. You were never like this when I was growing up. Never. And he's like, well, you know, I had to get nicer. I wanted them around.
Well, dude, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a grandpa. I've got a grandson that is about 16 months now. And it's a thing, man. Even my kids are like, oh my God, like, who are you? And what did you do with our dad? Again, the dad that they got compared to the grandpa that he's getting, totally two different people.
Where do you think the change comes in? Because I have friends now. I'm now old enough that my friends' kids are now having kids. And that makes me feel super old, by the way. But I remember them in high school. I remember them growing up. Now they're having babies. And I'm, what the heck? And even some girls I had in youth group are now married and having kids. And I'm feeling super old. Where does the difference come in for you, do you feel
I feel like a lot of it has to do with age, right? You mature, you see the world differently, you have different experiences, you kind of learn. Because I would say I have pretty good generational gaps between my kids. I have a 31-year-old, have a 21-year-old, and I have a 16-year-old. I would say even my children got a different version of dad. My first daughter, my oldest daughter, she probably got the hardest version of dad. The middle daughter was a little bit softer dad because of time, experience, age. And then my son gets probably the softest version of dad, although he probably catches a little bit harder version than even my middle daughter. He's a boy and I'm a man and I'm trying to raise a man. And I feel like I'm a little bit harder on him than I was on my middle daughter. I think as you get older, for me anyways, I understood the illusion of control. I think you try to control your kids to keep them safe. So you're trying to control the environment around them, what they're exposed to. You're trying to control all these things. And then you figure out you have zero control. Influence, you can give them the best examples you can give them and just hope for the best. They are individuals and they're going to do what they're going to do. And so I think by the time you get to your grandkid, I think that it's not my kid is a real thing. It's a weird feeling. I told my wife this. I did not ever understand that I could love a human being as much as I love my kids, but it not be my kid. So that is definitely true with my grandson. Like I love him just like he's one of my kids. I don't have to change stinky diapers. I don't have to discipline him. I get all the good stuff, man. And so it makes it easy.
You talk about, again, going back to your grandfather, you talk about growing up around him. And you talked about how in life, and truly this is accurate, I think, of everyone, and I think everyone would raise their hand in agreement to this, that life is about choices. Life is about what we choose to do with it and who we choose to follow. Social media is really big on that. It's really easy to click that I follow you button. It's really easy to click the I unfollow you button. I unfriend you, whatever it may be. I delete your phone number from my contact. It's really easy to eliminate people in our life is, I guess, what I'm trying to illustrate. It's really easy to even block them. Of course, if you ask my mom, it's very challenging to block somebody on their phone. That's a whole nother story. for another time. However, I say that to you is you had maybe not a plethora who you could have grabbed onto in your early years. And maybe even as you grew up, even into the later years, into your teen years, because let's face it, as teenagers, we don't want anyone telling us what to do.
Right.
I'm not going to take that from anybody. Yeah. Much like you found a father type figure that was not my father, who stepped into that role, was not even related to me, but somehow, some way I just leached onto his family, I think is how he illustrated it one time. And I was like, is that a compliment, Eric? Or is that a negative? Like, I don't know. I think there's so many times you could have easily said when you hit that older years, I don't want anything to do with grandpa. I'm done with you. Right. I'm going to delete you. I'm going to unfollow you. But you still chose to gravitate and be in his ecosystem. Why?
He was my hero. I looked up to him. I wanted nothing more than to spend as much time as I could with him. I never had any feeling of I'm too cool for grandpa or any of that kind of stuff. I had the unique experience too, though, of really living in two worlds, man. When I was at home with mom, that was the ghetto. And I grew up with all the dudes that I grew up with. Some of them went to prison. Some of them are dead. And very few of them made it out. I was exposed to that world on one side. And then on my grandfather's side, and that part of the family, I was exposed to the stuff I've described, the hunting, the fishing. For me, I honestly think that was my escape, man, because it was a rough world, dude. First time I got shot at, I was 12, 13 years old. So there was a lot of crazy stuff going on in our neighborhood. I watched people get jumped. I watched people get stabbed. I watched people get shot. There was gang. There was always fights. There was always violence. All this stuff going on and all these neighborhood politics and stuff. And when I was with grandpa, there wasn't any of that. It was all regular world stuff, a good, solid human being showing me the way.
But let's face it, there are others that would push on that and say, well, you're a product of your environment. I'm sure you've heard that in law enforcement. I'm sure you've heard that in different things and circles you've been a part of. It's pretty common. Was there ever moments when you had opportunity to maybe fall into those, we'll say, pitfalls of the gang life or the drug life or the whatever life that you grew up around, but maybe you had in the back of your ear or somehow in the ear canals, grandpa's voice saying, Matthew, so help me God, if you do this, I will end you. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I can't do his voice. And maybe you have that. I don't know.
Up in that environment, there's plenty of opportunity to get mixed up in all the wrong stuff. Sometimes you're just guilty by association. And I think people don't understand unless they've grown up in an environment like that in an inner city. It is very easy to get caught up. Again, I wasn't a gangbanger. I grew up with some. If you're in the wrong neighborhood, they don't care that you don't maybe represent the gang. They care that you hang out with so-and-so who does represent the gang. You're going to pay for that as well. It's easy to get caught up in those little neighborhood battles. And then, of course, drugs are all around you. So it's easy to get caught up in that. I think for me, biggest driving factor to keep me away from that was disappointing my family, my mom, my grandpa, and my grandma. And I didn't want to disappoint them. And so that was the driving force to keeping me out of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, discipline is a thing that I think people run away from, especially nowadays, it seems like. But how would he see you as a cop right now? What would be his thoughts on that?
I haven't thought about that, of what he would think about me being a cop. I think he would be proud of that fact of wearing a uniform and serving. The cop I've been, I don't know. I think he'd be proud in a sense because, again, I've done some crazy stuff in my career. I think he'd be in the proud Texan that he is. He'd be like, hell yeah, get some. That's hard to say, man. I haven't really thought about that question. I would hope that he'd be proud. I feel like he would. I also feel, though, there's a little part of me, because he was a little bit outlawish. There's a little part of me that thinks like he'd be like, man, I was really hoping you wouldn't go down that path, but you did.
Law enforcement, I feel like at times gets a really bad rap. They are racist. They're out to get people. They're not friendly. They're just there to ruin people's fun. I mean, I should be able to drive as fast as I want as long as I'm not hurting someone, which is stupid, by the way. It's a dumb thought. There are those out there that have not had a great view of law enforcement. And again, I think there's other agencies, not specifically your agency, but I think other agencies have gotten that same type of bad rap. Border security is a mess. It's a wreck. And let's face it, Arizona, if you're geographically challenged, you should know this. Arizona is near Mexico. It's close. Not as close as Texas or maybe New Mexico, but it's in that vicinity. How do you feel like people should be treating officers in your opinion?
Like human beings. They should be treating any human being like they would want to be treated themselves. I mean, that's kind of the golden rule. I think if we did stuff that way, now I understand that they don't a lot of times agree with our role in society. I think people have a misunderstanding. Like a lot of times they're like, why is this a law or that's a law? Like, look, I don't make laws. That's not my job. I'm a law enforcer. So there's these people that you elect and they make the laws, and then we're responsible for enforcing those laws. So making sure everybody follows the rules that the people you elected have made. All of these leaders in our society make these rules so that society functions correctly, and we all kind of get along and have these rules set. They empower us to then enforce those rules. And if people aren't following the rules, we step in and we do our thing. Sometimes it's stupid little rules that they break. Sometimes it's really bad rules that they break. We have to react accordingly. I think people have the misunderstanding that we're just like robots, that we think and act a certain way, and we don't have feelings, we don't have families, we don't have emotions. We have all that stuff. I have bad days, dude, where I may yell at somebody that didn't need yelling at. Then it's on me to correct that problem and to go back and make that right with that person as well. We fail at that in our career sometimes. When I say we, I'm talking about mistakes that I've made, and I know that we in law enforcement make these mistakes because I've lived it. We become cynical. We see the worst of the worst in this world. And so we're dealing with probably 5% of the world, dealing with that 5% of the world 95% of the time. We're dealing with the 5% that is bad. We're dealing with the bad the majority of the time. And then you start getting this cynical, skewed, myopic view of that being the entire world. And you can fall into the trap of treating everybody as if they are that 5%. And I think that's where we go wrong when we interact with people a lot of times, because you make the assumption that everybody's a bad guy and you treat them as such. For that 5%, we have to interact with them a certain way. And I don't think people understand that either. They only understand certain things, percentage of that 5% that are true evil, want to do nothing but death and destruction and hurting people. We have to deal with that. We have to clean that up. And that's not pretty. It causes us to be in that realm with them and act like them. You think of wolves and sheep. To fight the wolves, we have to be like the wolves sometimes. Then the sheep don't like that.
It's a good analogy. I know you had already said, treat everyone like we want to be treated ourselves. Right. But that isn't always the case, it seems like.
Especially nowadays.
It seems like, no. It seems like everybody's quick to get their cell phone out, video the next Kevin or Karen. Or Roger, apparently. I guess that's the new thing, too. Is if you're really terrible at the golf course, you're a Rogers. I don't know. I'm still digging into that.
I had not heard that. Right on.
Yeah. Nor did I. I'm trying to instill in my daughter, especially the fact of her being 16 going on 37, it seems like, or 27, somewhere in that realm, is when she interacts with law enforcement, when she interacts with people in authority, is to not be disrespectful, to say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, to act in such an appropriate way. But the reality is people are not doing that. So again, if I was going to give you somehow magical powers or godly powers, how would you fix the view of law enforcement?
To the points that you brought up, the biggest thing is we don't have to agree. It's being argumentative. It's being disrespectful, being challenging of the authority. I'm just there to do a job, and I'm going to do the job the certain way that I need to do it to stay safe, to keep others safe. I don't need somebody that doesn't understand the job, maybe is in a little bit of hot water. I don't need to argue with them about the job while we're trying to fix something. I don't need to debate with them anything about the law itself of why this law is in place or if it's right or wrong or any of that stuff. And so people nowadays, they want to hold court before you can even do anything that affects them. And so if I come up and I say, hey, you have broken the law, turn around, put your hands behind your back, you are going to jail, I'm arresting you. They then want to argue all these points. It wasn't me, or you didn't see what you saw, or somebody else is lying, it's somebody else's fault. They want to argue all these points, and we don't have time for that. That's essentially where we get killed. People who really don't like us and want to do us harm, what they do is they have their plan of attack lined out already. They know what they're going to do. They know how they're going to attack us, and they're looking for opportunities. If we interact with somebody that has that thought in their mind and we don't take control of the situation, then we're in a pine box with a flag draped over it, and our family is wishing us goodbye. People need to understand the gravity of our job too. And so we don't have time, a lot of interactions, we don't have time to sit there and explain everything to you while we're trying to take control of a situation or while we're trying to maintain control. What we do is we get there, we control the situation, get everything calmed down as much as we can, and then we start working through all the problems. Okay, what's actual, what's not, who's at fault, who's not. And then we start listening to some stories and breaking down information and figuring out where we're headed from there. When we show show up to stuff, especially stuff that we've been called to. Hey, something's going on. We need the police. We show up and we're like, hey, we're the police and we're here to solve this problem. And then everybody's spewing hate at us. And we're like, okay, so we didn't have to come here. We didn't even want to come here. We would have been fine not even knowing about this problem, but you chose to call us. Now we're here to solve it. So let's stop all this stuff and just move forward.
I love that you said that. I mean, you could have been 70 probably plus other places rather than just hanging out trying to play referee in those situations. That's what it seems like. It's like an umpire at a baseball game. It's like, well, I know that rule better than you do. Well, why don't you have a blue shirt on and standing behind the plate with some catcher gear on?
And the internet kills us. They heard it on the internet or they read it somewhere or Wikipedia says or whatever.
Speaking of Reddit, they heard it on Reddit or X, well, that's a law now. Why are you doing that?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about being connected with your grandfather, and you said it already a couple of times. The greatest generation I think that we knew of, which is that World War II generation. They came from so much, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and away they went. And there was just so much, I think, trauma and tragedy that came out of that generation. And I think that's what molded them and made them and shaped them.
Absolutely, yeah. They were and are tough people because they had tough circumstances.
And again, never, ever disagree with that or argue that point. I won't. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I would think if we're going to flip that coin over, there are some that would say, well, what about this generation that we're experiencing, right? They've walked through COVID. They've walked through the transgender. They've walked through all this other stuff. And I think to myself, future generations, what are they going to make of the last 25 years or so?
Dude, I don't know. I guess it depends on definitions of hard. Yeah. And again, coming from my profession and seeing some of the worst that the world has to offer, what some of the people consider hard, like not getting their latte built correctly by the barista, they consider that a devastating blow. I'm like, are you serious, dude? Like, have you been killed? Did it make you die? No, you're fine. I don't know, man. I just think people that face real adversity, when you look back at World War II, and you look at the Jewish people that were marched into death camps and just killed by the thousands. When you look at people facing that, when you look at people that were in soup lines to just get a little bit of soup and hopefully some bread. And I remember my grandpa telling me stories where they would get a little chunk of meat and they would make a stew, and they would put a bunch of bread in it so that it felt like they were all eating a bunch of meat because it tasted like meat. When you have circumstances like that compared to today where they get your order wrong on takeout or Grubhub, their app is down so you can't get food delivered to your front step. I just don't think that's hard. I guess my definition would be different.
There's a country song, so I don't know how you feel about country.
Oh, I love country.
There's a country song. I might be saying his name wrong. Jamie Johnson, his big famous song, I'm sure it is, his signature song. Grandpa, what's the picture you have here? It's black and white. It's really not clear. And he said, yeah, that's me at 11. The chorus of it, I'm going to jump forward. He said, you should have seen it in color.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Describing all of these horrific things, going through the war, the soup lines, all of that. And again, I think this current generation that we're now experiencing, your grandkids, even your kids and my kid included, I don't think they've really experienced what our parents went through. I mean, my dad's in his 70s now. I don't think they really understood and understand what happened. And it's sad to me.
Yeah, that's why we're at where we are at with our society. They don't understand true adversity. They don't understand where we've come from truly as a nation to get where we're at. And you've heard the whole bad times make strong men make good times. That's where we're at. We're in a society of weakness right now. They don't have an understanding, a true understanding of their roots and where we've come from. And they haven't felt real adversity. And I hope to God, because I have kids and I have a grandkid, I hope to God our country gets back on track. Don't want them to have to feel that again and go through those type of tough times to get back to good times.
So you mentioned your grandson. Now going back in time with Grandpa, what lesson did he teach you that now you're trying to teach this grandson?
Oh, man. I think for me, it's those things that I hit on in the letter. And of course, my grandson's not even 2 yet, so it's a little bit difficult. But
come on, get with the program. Like, come on, grandson.
I think right now, as where he's at in his stage of life, showing him as much love as I can, also show him to be fearless, to not fear what the world puts on you as restraints. That way he can make his own path. I think that's one of the problems is We create all these buffers. We try and protect. And I think that sets our kids up for failure in some sense. You kind of instill that fear in them. You kind of limit them in a sense, trying to not do that, make him understand that the world is his. All he has to do is step up and grab it. He gets a little bit older, like 3, we'll start doing some crazy shit together.
That's awesome. I heard this phrase years ago in a church setting. The pastor would say it quite often. He said, more is caught than taught.
Yeah.
Again, more is caught than taught. When you hear that, what comes to mind?
That means they watch you more than they listen to you. He's watching Grandpa to see, what does Grandpa do in these situations? I can look back at distinct times with my grandpa where I saw him doing something, interacting with somebody where I was like, to, honor your word and do what you say you're going to do. So that type of stuff, I think, is what it's referring to.
I wonder nowadays if this generation, if they were to look back and think about their parents and maybe even think about their grandparents, that phrase again, more is caught than taught. I just hope that they've caught something and now they're trying to teach it on. I don't know, man. I'm real skeptical of where we're going and where we're
headed. I disagree with you, dude. And I think the problem is we've moved from watching those around us who mean the most to us to all of these essentially false idols, man. All these people that have 200,000 followers that are not even real friends or anything. We've gotten away from reality, which our reality is our world right around us. It's not the internet. It's not social media. It's not all the crap that you see on TV. It's what's actually around you. And I think people are so into their devices and those worlds that they miss everything going on right in front of them. The caught piece of that statement has changed for sure, right? They're catching the wrong things.
And that's the sad part. Is once that generation is gone, there's no recreating that. There's no do-over. There's no undo button.
Right. Which is, again, I fear that we're headed to a bad spot in the world. The world doesn't play by those rules. The world is a hard place. You have to be tough and resilient to make it through. And I think as we get away from that catching what's right around you and paying attention to what's most important. I think as we get away from that we're going to find, those generations are going to find themselves in an empty and bad spot. And they're going to have to fight their way back to reality.
Well, my granny, she passed away in 97. I think she'd be whooping some heinies if she had her way.
Yeah.
She just would be putting some people in the timeout chair and not in a good way. Is there a way folks can connect with you? Is there a way if somebody wants to hear more about your story, more about you, what's the best way they can do that?
Social media, which I just slammed on, right? But of course,
it's okay though. But use it in a good way. Not you're saying use it in a good way in this context, not in a mindless zombie context, if I'm helping you there.
You are absolutely. I appreciate it, bro. Good looking out. On Instagram is where I'm most active, and my handle is @deputy, like deputy sheriff, @deputy_one time, all one word. Most active. I'm also on LinkedIn, just under my name, Matthew Thomas. I have a website as well. It's onetimenation.com, and that has my bio and has a little bit more about me as well.
So if I were going to get you in Sun Devil Stadium, right on top of that sickle, I think is the right terminology there, the sickle of the devil, which is also a little weird for me because being the blue devil, yours is not quite blue, thankfully.
We call it a fork. So
okay. All right. A fork. Fair enough. You had Herm Edwards there for like 5 seconds as your football coach. That's about all I know of the amazing Sun Devils. And your ability to help kids miss free throw shots, I do think they had that element.
We produced Pat Tillman. I'll just throw that out.
That's amazing. That's worth it right there, right? That's worth the price of admission. But if I put you smack dab in the middle, maybe even at State Farm Stadium, which is where the Arizona Cardinals play, we put you at that 50-yard line. If I put you at that 50-yard line, what would be your message to future fathers of America, and maybe even current fathers of America?
Man. Bro, you came out of left field with that one, bro. Man, for fathers, I think my message would be kind of some of the stuff that we discussed. Don't fall for the illusion of control and just love as much as you can love and set the example for your kids. Be what they need you to be, not what the world says you should be. That'd probably be it.
I think that's important. I think of these episodes as, again, a letter not only from what you would write to somebody, but maybe your future letter. Like if you're sitting down, pinning this out for your next generation or for those dads that you interact with on a day-to-day basis? Because I'm guessing you probably run into some men that aren't being very father figure-like. I would imagine.
Yeah.
Just a guess, just a hunch. And so my thought was you could pass along that future message to them. Maybe they would grab onto that. Again, more is caught than taught, that they would grab onto that, catching that from you and doing something with it. Not a Pokemon. No, some solid advice there. Well, again, Matt, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. And I just want to just tell you that I really appreciate you giving us some time today. But again, man, I want to say thank you so much for being here and really appreciate the time you gave.
Thank you. And it was great to join you, man. Nice time, Dion.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, I would say sincerely or respectfully submitted, or what's a great best wishes? That seems silly to say it that way as we wrap up our time with our good friend Matt there. I'm wondering about this for you as we send our letter away, put it in the mailbox, flip the flag up. That greatest generation. I think, and again, I'm sort of a novice comic book person, but I do know this about comic books. That there was this character that they created in the X-Men, the Phoenix. You remember this one for those comic book nerds out there? I say that with respect. She rose from the ashes. Wasn't that kind of the thing? She kind of came up from the ashes. What if the greatest generation is right now? You could be a part of that. You could rise up from the ashes. You could take advice from the old. I know, really scary to think about. Old people, they don't know anything except pinochle and prune juice. What if you could learn from them, glean from them, take from them, and then apply it? I know, the big word, apply it to your life. What an amazing thing that would happen if you could do that. Be a revolutionary person today. Listen to what Matt said, that handshake meaning something, not just for fun. Think about that. Let me know. opspodcast.com is a great place to let me know. That's our website, home base. You can let us know on the social medias at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned till next week as we walk in other people's shoes.